everyone, and welcome to our ySKILLS webinar. We're happy to see so many people today. We are also happy to be able to introduce our new report. Today we're going to have some presentations and discussion. My name is Elisabeth Slaksrud. I'm a professor at the Department of Media and Communication at the University of Oslo. We have been working with our colleagues at LSE in the wider ySKILLS project to look at mental health and digital skills. And you all have seen the program. We are going to first have a few presentations. You are all welcome to ask questions and comments in the chat. And I'm just going to introduce the speakers as we go along, but I just wanted to introduce the core team who's been behind this report. Tine Jensen from the Department of Psychology at the University of Oslo, Line Indrevold-Stenike from the same department, and Reidar Skei-Jessen. And from LSE and from England, we have Maria Stoilova, Richard Graham, and Sonia Livingston, and myself. And the report is now out. You can see it, you can download it. We will give you the link, and I hope you will enjoy this. But first, let me introduce our first speaker, which is June Lowry. So June, very happy to have you here. June is head of unit accessibility, multilingualism, and the safer internet at the Director General for Communications Network, Content and Technology, DG Connect at the European Commission. And her works aim to promote a better internet for children by protecting, empowering, and respecting children online. So she also is responsible for the big strategy that many of us know. And her unit is also responsible for making the digital life in Europe more accessible, inclusive, regardless of language, disability, and age. And as equality coordinator of DG Connect, she also maintains an overview of the implementation of the Union of Equality with the DG. In other words, a very relevant policy-related person for us all. So I'm very, very happy to first give the floor to June Lowry-Kingston from the European Commission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and thank you to all the organisers, in fact, for inviting me today. I'm very honoured to be among such an illustrious panel. And really, I'd like to start, although my topic's about EU policies and priorities, I'd really like to start by saying thank you and well done to everyone involved in the study and to this bit of the whole ySKILLS project as well. And congratulations to everyone involved in it. You know, thanks also to the young people who were able and willing to share such very personal information at times. And well done to all the researchers really for creating that atmosphere that those young people were willing to do so. So I think it's a very timely piece of research. It's a very precious piece of research. We know there's really far too little research going on such an important topic. So well done to you all. And I'm really looking forward to reading the whole thing after having read the executive summary sort of quickly. And timely also because, although I don't know many details of this, the Commission President herself announced a new initiative on mental health for next year. In her State of the Union speech this September, she said, and I'm going to quote her here, "We should take better care of each other, and for many who feel anxious and lost, appropriate, accessible and affordable support can make all the difference." And I think this study goes some way to showing what should be appropriate and accessible support. So I think it's a report that really is hitting us at the right time. So from the point of view of DG Connect's bit of the European Commission, our main ambition, our political guideline is to make Europe fit for the digital age. And that really means everyone should be able to enjoy a Europe fit for the digital age, regardless of their age. And just as physical products, you could say, have to meet safety standards to keep users more safe and healthy, how can we apply this to digital products and services to minimize the bad side effects that sadly we see all too often? And so what are our policies and our priorities where children are concerned? Well, in terms of policy tools, I guess we have a bit of funding and we have what we can do in terms of legislative and the sort of digital environment. So looking at funding, we have a little bit of money for research, like ySKILLS, but not as much as we would like, and I'm sure not as much as many people in the audience would like either. And in fact, our main funding goes, I suppose, on our portal, Better Internet for Kids EU, and the network of Safer Internet Centres who offer, I suppose, preventative help as well as reactive help to young people. And that really comes in terms of what we're looking at today, really two main actions. So looking at skills, how we can help through the Safer Internet Centres, help children create positive habits so that they can benefit from life online, and that they can also have the skills and the resilience to know what to do when things go wrong. And the Safer Internet Centres all provide a helpline which should provide expert advice in a non-judgmental and certainly a non-victim blaming way that can help children in difficulties when they run into those difficulties online. And we definitely will share the study's findings with the network. And I think the insights you've gained should be part of our reflection on how to engage with and effectively reach such vulnerable groups. And I'll speak a little bit more about that when I talk a bit about the big strategy. So a bit of funding, but then on the other hand, like all governments, I suppose, or policymakers, we have, legislation and we have coordination and sort of soft law as well. And in that context, we have two landmark texts adopted this year, which would really, we hope, help change the digital environment from our point of view for children. And they certainly together set the tracks for our future actions. And those two texts would be the Better Internet for Kids Plus strategy adopted in May, and the Digital Services Act that was recently adopted and just published as EU law in October and entered into force formally most recently now in this month in November. So as you said, Elizabeth, probably many people have heard of the Better Internet for Kids Plus strategy, based around three pillars: to protect, empower, and respect or involve children online. And if I just talk a little bit about those three pillars in turn and how that fits certainly in terms of protection into the DSA. So in terms of protecting, one of the key actions under this pillar of the strategy is a comprehensive code of conduct on age-appropriate design, through which we hope to make lasting changes in the digital environment for children. And we were very fortunate in the timing because the strategy was adopted in May and the DSA was actually adopted in record time, and so is now EU law. The DSA, I think, particularly relevant in three areas. So there is Article 28, which is specifically on child online protection for all digital services that are accessible to minors. There are the articles that concern the very large online platforms and search engines and the whole risk assessment, risk mitigation exercise, which also should include, and again, I quote, I think the design of their recommender systems and any other relevant algorithmic system, as well as setting a legal framework for codes of conduct, where our code of conduct, of course, fits very well. So those two texts together, I think, give us an opportunity to consider the practical recommendations in the study's call for action, particularly the call for action to industry. So I'm very happy with the timing of that, and we'll certainly be looking at what you recommend there. Of course, there's other relevant EU legislation. We have the Audiovisual Media Services Directive. We have the proposal, not yet entered into law, on what you could say ethical AI. That's the proposal for a regulation laying down harmonized rules on artificial intelligence, as well as, of course, the GDPR and how children's data is processed. But we hope very much the code under the DSA will really help us reach a more effective implementation of relevant EU legislation. But the strategy has also two other pillars. So pillar B, which is empowering, it's really all about skills. And there, under the big strategy, we're going to focus more on vulnerable groups with this aim of leaving no one behind and addressing those who are really not in the mainstream. And here again, I think this particular study can help us think how we can help those who need extra or more targeted help, in part perhaps through co-associated factors, being in other perhaps marginalized groups, should we say. But there, I think the findings of the report are very, very relevant for us. And last but not least, we have the pillars on respect, which means sort of practical involvement and consultation of young people. And I think here again, we can learn from the study, and I think the study reflects what we want to see as best practice, how we can really listen to young people and actively involve them, because that's the only way to be sure that the actions we are funding are as effective as possible. And so we need to, I think, constantly review and refine the approach that we take, also involving our safer internet centres, to really help children enjoy a happy and a nurturing environment online, which is one of the aims of the ySKILLS project overall. As we see in the study, this community aspect can be very powerful for good or for ill, and obviously we want to accentuate the positive. So I think that's all I want to say in terms of my opening remarks. I've totally lost track of time, Elizabeth, so I hope I haven't exceeded my time slot, but I'm happy to take questions now, or of course later on in the general panel discussion.
No, you actually are, you still have time. So as researchers, we always go over time. So we're very impressed now. Okay, so maybe is it possible just to ask you a follow-up question before we go to the next speaker?
Of course.
So I noted one of the many things now is that it focuses on vulnerable groups, not leaving one behind. But from your perspective, and is it possible to say anything about what kind of risks that you see as can harm children when they go online in terms of mental development? What is sort of the field looking from the policy side?
Yeah, well, I mean, you all are the experts much more than me, but from the policy point of view, so forgive my lack of expertise on this. So from obviously we have the codification that some of you around the table have made as well, you know, content, conduct, contact, and increasingly commercial risks. So one of the nice things about the Better Internet for Kids strategy is we're working hand in hand with our colleagues also from DG Justice and Consumer Protection to look at children also as consumers and to really ramp up the resources that we're able to dedicate to that, so that to try and protect children from commercial pressures in a more active way than has probably been the case up till now. I think aspects that concern us are really through the lack of effective age verification, that children are exposed really to this huge range of content that is not appropriate for them. And that, as we know all too often, you know, from the cases that go disastrously wrong and that really tragically wrong, that can, you know, lead to the very worst of outcomes. So looking at how we can prevent that through more effective age verification that also is appropriate and that can be accepted by all stakeholders. But I would think also looking at I think children's mental development rather than specific mental health problems, but their sort of development, I would say also in terms of this seemingly ubiquitous access to pornography. What is that doing in terms of healthy relationships? Perhaps increased misogyny, and then the pressure on young women and girls as they sort of hit puberty and go on to have, you know, healthy sexual relations. What is really shaping that? And I think that's something that we're quite concerned about across the Commission services, that are engaged also in terms of gender-based violence and seeing how that leads then into adult life. So I think really probably the whole gamut of harms that you see, but trying to think, you know, practically what can we do about certain aspects of that? And I think age verification, getting that accepted and effectively implemented could help shape that digital environment. And of course, we're never going to find a silver bullet for this. There's no perfect solution. But even if we could get sort of 80-20, I feel at the moment that the doors are open to all sorts of online harms. And if we can try and close those doors, even partially, then we could prevent some of these situations arising or happening in such an extreme state. You know, in Britain, obviously we have the Molly Dowler, and you know, there are just cases like that all across Europe of children who've really suffered through being exposed to content that they never should have been exposed to, and never in such relentless quantities.
So would it be too presumptuous of me? I think that I can also hear more research is needed?
It's not us you have to convince, it's those who give us the budget, Elizabeth. Believe me,
Yes.
we're your biggest fans and biggest advocates, and if we try, but I think we all agree that more research is needed, definitely, and ideally long term as well.
Yeah, and I think looking at the audience here, and we can see there's also a lot of researchers here, I think we all agree that there was still, work to be done, and I think that this, hopefully what we will hear now moving forward in this webinar will also be inspiring in terms of looking at new aspects.
I'm sure.
So thank you so much, June. We will come back to you, and I'm sure also with questions once we go to the Q&A section. But now I'd like to welcome my colleague and coordinator of the ySKILLS project, Line Hanens, who is a professor at the Institute of Media Studies at KU Leuven, and the project coordinator of ySKILLS. So this is a huge project. So Leanne will help us sort of sort it out. And I should just say that, of course, Leanne research interest touches upon European media policy, impact on citizens, measuring news diversity, young people in social media use, focus on vulnerable youth with migration background. And she both combines qualitative and quantitative methods, which is, always a plus for us, and multi-site comparison migration research in other 2020 H2020 funded projects. So Leanne, we're really happy to have you here, and you have 15 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth. I will start immediately by going into the project, ySKILLS project, and our aim, our overarching aim. So this is a project we are working on, and it involves 15 partners from 13 countries. So indeed, it's a big project. We're in the third year, and we aim to enhance and to maximize the long-term positive impact of the digital environment on young people's well-being by stimulating their resilience through the enhancement of digital skills. So we really propose a child-centric approach to understand how the internet has variable consequences for children and young people's online participation. For instance, their freedom of expression, their education, play, and protection from harm. So they're seen in ySKILLS as active agents in their own development. And we examine how digital skills mediate the risks and opportunities related to digital technologies. How do we go about? Well, we noted at first an underdevelopment of measures for digital skills testing around especially the softer non-technical skills that allow young people to safely interact in a civil manner on social media. And one of those areas is that of critical information literacy, including the ability to understand, for instance, the sources, the intention of the sources, extremist content, for instance, and the ability to critically engage in information online, for instance, estimating the trustworthiness of the content online. So in ySKILLS, we understand digital skills as a diverse set of technical, operational, information navigation, communication and interaction, and content creation and production skills. And we know that they're unequally distributed and influenced by a number of individual social and country characteristics that influence one another and also reinforce one another. So this led to the Youth Digital Skills Indicator, the YDSI, which is a unique cross-nationally validated measurement instrument with 31 items distributed over perceived digital skills on the one hand, and digital knowledge questions on the other. All skill dimensions have functional aspects. You see the orange bars, the critical aspects of skills and the functional aspects of skills. The functional aspects deal with understanding the technical functionalities and being able to use them. The critical aspects refer to understanding how and why devices and content are produced in certain ways. So for us in ySKILLS, our main assumption is that to participate fully in digital societies, being skilled in all 4 dimensions and on both aspects, both critical and functional, is indispensable. Hence, ySKILLS is really taking important steps towards a better understanding and also a multifaceted measurement of young people's digital literacy and its value for their well-being. Digital skills and well-being are moreover measured longitudinally over 3 waves. And we also devised performance tests so that we can actually compare what the perceived skill levels are of the children and young people and what they actually can do online. And we also planned, and we did conduct specific studies focusing on at-risk groups of young people. And today's seminar is on one of these at-risk groups. So here's our conceptual model, or the model we embarked on in the project. And in ySKILLS, we seek to explain the uneven distribution of digital skills through a model, this one that identifies actors and factors, and also the pathways that lead to the acquisition of digital skills. So when we talk about antecedents and consequences, and about perhaps just a little bit about preliminary results of the first and the second wave so far. So we're still at the cross-sectional level. We haven't gone into the third wave, which will start the beginning of next year, so that we can really deepen and widen our results in a longitudinal fashion. So what we see, for instance, not surprisingly, is that across the 6 EU countries, across the board, age is positively related to perceived digital skills and knowledge. Gender also shows a differentiated picture. Boys reported, for instance, having the most technical operational skills. Girls rated their information navigation and content creation skills lowest. And non-binary youth gave themselves the highest score on content creation and production and obtained the highest score on actual digital knowledge. So perceived digital skills and knowledge are associated with more exposure to a range of risks, such as cyber hate, sexting, as a receiver, or to a lesser degree as a sender. Moreover, higher digital knowledge is associated with lower levels of well-being. But in contrast, and at the same time, perceived digital skills and digital knowledge are associated with a whole range of opportunities, such as online learning, engaging in social relations, entertainment, content creation, or use of, for instance, health-related digital technologies. So as we aim and as we go along in the project, and we aim to deepen our understanding of how digital skills improve or may undermine at-risk vulnerable or disadvantaged children and young people's well-being, it will be crucial to identify which groups are more at risk. In other words, which groups are less able or are more unable to translate the use of digital technologies into those positive outcomes or to avoid negative outcomes. So we ask ourselves, under what circumstances are they able to do this? And it has become increasingly clear that specific groups of young people, for example, the psychologically vulnerable, may be less likely to be able to take advantage of those online opportunities. Even more concerning is that they may also be less able to avoid more negative outcomes. So central in our approach in ySKILLS is the assumption that unequal distribution of outcomes is linked to the unequal distribution of digital skills. So ySKILLS follows a mixed methods approach, and it also includes qualitative in-depth studies. And one of them, which is the focus of today's webinar, deals with young people's experiencing internet-related mental health difficulties. And this is really a fascinating study which responds to concerns, both at the end of the public and growing concerns also among professionals, that social and peer-to-peer interaction online, especially linked to harmful user-generated content shared in niche groups, might cause or might worsen mental health difficulties. So the research that will be discussed by my ySKILLS colleagues was situated in London and Oslo, and thereby was situated in contrasting cultures of childhood, as was one of the findings revealed by prior EU Kids Online comparative results, comparative research. Norway tends to offer a culture of childhood empowerment, while the UK was more a culture and is more a culture characterized by a relatively protectionist approach to childhood. So this particular research in ySKILLS explored, among many other things, the relevance of, for instance, help seeking online or offline, and coping skills in aiding or, on the other hand, undermining their resilience. So one of the questions, and I'm going to finish here, one may ask is in what sense these young people facing mental issues are vulnerable from a digital skills perspective. At first sight, not in terms of their operational technical digital skills, as we will see, for they appear to be skilled and sophisticated users of digital technologies. But of course, the digital environment is very complex and they not always know how to cope with it. So a paradox emerges here in that low mental well-being is linked to high levels of digital skills. So the acquisition of digital skills is to be seen as a double-edged sword that can be both helpful and harmful. But this is, of course, only the beginning of the narrative we'll hear more about right now.
Thank you so much, Len. Perfect timing. So I think we, looking at the clock, I think we will come back to Len with more questions. And I'm sure that the audience has more questions about this overall theoretical model, but also the project. But now we will turn into the actual results and findings of this section of this project that has to do with young people's mental health and well-being and the role of digital skills. And now I'd like to invite one of my co-authors, Maria Stoilova. She is a postdoctoral researcher at the Department of Media and Communication at the London School of Economics and Political Science. And she also works at the intersection of children's rights and digital technology, with a particular focus on the opportunities and risks of digital media use in the everyday lives of children and young people, data, privacy online, digital skills, mental health, and pathways to harm and well-being. So Maria, we are looking forward to hear your presentation.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I hope you can see my screen. So recent data on the UK shows that a quarter of young people who are aged between 17 and 19 now have a probable mental health disorder. And regardless of where you are in Europe, you've probably heard some similar alarming statistics, and many describe this as a mental health crisis for young people at the moment. And there's a growing concern about the role of digital technologies and whether they can worsen mental health conditions. So you can see the names of all my lovely colleagues and their faces who worked on this project. So we were tasked with the question of what is the role of digital skills? What is the role of the different dimensions of digital skills that Lane just introduced, but also what is the role in terms of their relationship to mental health? Does it aid or worsen mental health conditions? And we also wanted to know whether there's any recommendations that can be drawn from the experiences of young people. So to answer these questions, we conducted in-depth qualitative interviews with 62 young people who are aged between 12 and 22 in Norway and the UK. Most of them were actually between 16 and 19 years, the majority. And they had experienced some internet-related trauma, whether it's cyberbullying, grooming, and sexual abuse, self-harm, or so on. And they had mental health difficulties of varying severity. Most of them had received some treatment in the past. So what did we find about how young people use their digital skills? We found that they're actually very active and competent internet users with a range of sophisticated digital skills. I think Lane already alluded to this. But the young people that we spoke to, we found that they very actively engage in the digital world and they utilize the affordances that it provides, but also they shape its parameters. Sometimes they even go against the grain of what was envisioned by design and by regulation. And this includes their tactics of moving between platform, curating audiences, merging app functionalities, or moving between them. So young people digital encounters are also very social and collaborative. They share insights, they share tips and tactics with their online peers or with niche online communities in ways that offer support and facilitate their coping. So they're not only active, but also competent internet users. There were varying levels of skills amongst the participants that took part in our research. Younger adolescents were as a whole less competent than the older peers, but they were gradually developing digital skills over time. And overall, the young people that we spoke to were fairly highly skilled with sophisticated knowledge of the digital ecology as well. We also found that young people with mental health difficulties are developing particular digital skills. They encompass the different dimensions that Lane was speaking so far, including technical information and communication and creation skills, but they were also going beyond them to reflect their mental health experiences. So, for example, the skill of identifying a colors algorithm or recognizing an extreme space or dangerous person, or more positively, the skill involved in knowing how to game the algorithm to make one's own feed a positive space, how to locate safe spaces and trustworthy people as well. So the quotes here that you see, the first one, for example, is from a girl who is using her skills to promote her mental health by flagging information that is helpful to her and that she can find quite easily in times of need. But for young people with mental health difficulties, online engagement can also undermine their well-being. Online communities, they can become toxic, helpful material can be mixed with triggering content, coping can be isolating. So what have we learned about how digital skills aid or worsen mental health? The young people that we spoke to used their digital skills and devoted considerable efforts to anticipate and manage the potential threats and avoid upsets. Several young people described becoming aware of how social media algorithms promote problematic content. Recognizing one's own triggers and how they arise is a kind of digital skills that combines both self-knowledge and understanding of the digital ecology. But we also found that it's a task that is hard to do. Experiences of hardship were often understood as part of growing up in a digital world. We heard stories of expanding understanding and competence, of growing confidence and maturity, and developing self-efficacy and resilience. Yet those stories also revealed episodes of struggle, of relapse, of failure to cope, and a later recognition for the harmful impact. And my colleagues who are speaking after me will expand on this point a little bit. Hence, young people may know about, but cannot always deal with the risks that they encounter. And the young people who had better digital skills did not necessarily have better mental health and well-being outcomes. So here, the second quote on the slide shows how very sophisticated digital skills can be used to access extreme online content, which can sometimes be harmful. So why is it that digital skills are not always making things better? One important reason for this is that digital skills are intertwined with psychosocial life skills, and young people are still developing these life skills, including through their experiences of mental health difficulties. Given the challenges that they face, young people don't always manage to put their skills into practice as well, especially if the mental health difficulties is impacting upon their functioning. Furthermore, the development of digital skills take place during a complex developmental period. So this period is characterized by exploration, by risk-taking, by vulnerability. So it's not surprising that some young people are acting against their own knowledge of what is safe or sensible. They're taking risks, for example, or they're daring themselves. And this may not reflect a lack of skills or irrational response, we would argue, but rather a different set of digital skills and purposes. However, we also found that it's not only about the level of youth digital skills. Independent of digital skill, affordances may result in even riskier online engagement. Shaped by the operation of algorithms, digital design molds the activities of young people and others that they interact with. Algorithms act as a distorting mirror. They magnify problematic content, and they may push young people with mental health vulnerabilities down a spiral of ever more overwhelming, upsetting, or extreme content. Platforms are also out of sync with the young person's current state of mind or the ability to cope as they draw on digital uses which has happened in the past. This can lead to experiences of triggering, of unwanted exposure, or setbacks. So such content may be hard to break away from. The more that young people engage with such content, the more it becomes a trend, portraying a negative world that seems difficult to escape. The activities of others can seem to normalize extreme or toxic spaces, and this adds peer pressure to accept rather than to avoid the challenging content. And once you see such content, you can't unsee it, as the quote on this slide says. So such challenges test young people's digital skills, and at times their skills are insufficient to the task, which can result in unhappy or harmful experiences. So I would now advise you to have a look at the report, not now, but maybe later, because we have a set of recommendations there, which maybe we can unpack during the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. And I think I also will not now, because I can see people invite people to think about questions. So if this triggers something, you know, please write your question in the chat, and we'll see and get through those. I think we will now dwell even deeper into some of the findings. And again, I think we have to emphasize that this is a big report. It's a quite extensive study. This is the first report that comes out, but we will also look at other things. But I think that now I will invite my colleague here in Oslo, a different department of psychology, Tine Jensen. She's a professor and clinical psychologist here at the University of Oslo and a senior researcher at the Norwegian Center for Violence and Traumatic Stress Studies. And her research interests focus on understanding the consequences of traumatic experiences and the impact that they have on youth and their families, and on change process in psychotherapy, and has been involved in several studies on trauma treatment. I can mention the Norwegian Utøya study after the terror attack here in Oslo, but also involved in studies on refugees' experiences, mental health outcomes, and she's a member of the ISTSS Guidelines Committee for Early Intervention and Treatment of PTSD.
Okay, thank you for that, Elizabeth. And so in my short talk, I'll be focusing on what keeps youth from sharing negative online experiences. And this is in the interviews, we actually asked the youth to talk about both positive and negative experiences, and we asked them who they share these experiences with. And since we did have a focus on mental health issues, and since many of these experiences are harmful and potentially traumatic, we also asked them about what stopped them from sharing negative and potentially harmful experiences with other adults who may be in a position to actually give them advice or help them handle difficult online experiences. So as has been mentioned, there are many, many positive aspects related to youth's online activities, but here I will then be focusing on negative online experiences and barriers to disclosing risky activities. So many of the youth that we did interview were recruited on the basis that they had negative or risky online experiences. They had experienced online bullying, different forms of sexual solicitation, such as being coerced or to do sexual things, or sending sexualized pictures, Also, many had negative content experiences, such as seeing someone shoot himself or observing a small child online with a knife saying she wanted to die. Also, almost all the youth were exposed to online sites that promote eating disorders, cutting oneself, or suicidal sites. So through our interviews, it was very clear that the youth really live their lives much online, and that the online and offline distinction isn't maybe so helpful. So a person who experiences online bullying also experiences this offline. So in our interviews, we saw that the youth had many, so they shared their negative experiences, and we saw that they did have many coping skills and that they used social media to cope with difficult experiences. They shared their experiences with others online. They could seek up others that were in the same situation. They could seek out information in order to make meaning of stressful online experiences. However, we were also struck by the fact that negative online experiences, for the most part, are kept online. So experiences of sexual exploitation, online bullying, and exposure to harmful online content was by many kept as a secret for other adults, such as parents, teachers, and therapists also. In fact, interestingly, for many, this was an active process of secrecy that actually mirrors what has been seen and described in the child abuse and sexual research field. Again, highlighting that the online and offline distinction may not be so helpful. So when we analyzed our interviews for barriers to help seeking and disclosure, we identified these 6 barriers. I was too young to understand what was going on. Adults don't understand. There was a lack of trust in adults. They were worried about the consequences disclosing could lead to. Many did not want to be a burden for others, and many talked about how upsetting it felt to talk about these things. So I will now go through each of these points and provide some short examples from what the youth told us. So one girl who was only 11 when the first sexual abuse online happened to her, and this actually lasted over a year and a half, she at first didn't understand what was going on, but after a while she understood that this was something that wasn't very helpful or was harmful for her. And she said that it made it harder for her to tell her parents. So she says, "It was my sister's friend and he was 21. Well, I didn't think too much about it because I kind of had good friends and family. So it was just that one person. And it went on for a long time, constantly. But because I was so young, I didn't think too much about the fact that it was actually not okay. So it didn't affect me that much until the police got involved. That's when I really understand what had happened. And when the police starts to ask you lots of questions, you actually have to start explaining. But I said a lot of, I don't know, because I didn't understand everything that happened to me. So even more prevalent in our interviews was the message to us adults that we really do not understand. Like this one girl who both experienced online bullying and sexual abuse. She says, "The thing is that when grown-ups were young, they didn't have social media. They barely had telephones. So to go to a grown-up and try to explain things in modern times, well, it feels like going to my grandparent and saying, can't make that food longer because now everybody eats taco." So it's this basic feeling that adults are really old-fashioned and that we can't understand what's going on online. So sadly, many youth had negative experiences with adults that led them to a generalized feeling of distrust. such as this boy who has experienced bullying and unwanted sharing of sexual pictures. He explains, "Well, I told my teacher about being bullied when I was in elementary school, and that led to more bullying. I told them about violence at home when I was in junior high, and then my stepdad beat me up even more. So there's really no point in talking to others about online bullying and unwanted sharing of sexual pictures," which was his experience. So, and then a lot of youth were worried about the consequences of talking about this. So one thing was threats and blame. So one said that I was afraid he would get mad and find me, and I was afraid my parents would get mad at me for doing this. Some were also threatened to silence. Like one said, I couldn't say anything because he threatened to take his own life. Interestingly, some felt that telling was the same as betraying the online community. It's as if they had a collective secret that they needed to hide from others. Like this one who says, "It feels like telling a secret to talk about the online community. It feels like backbiting a good friend, and that's not something I want to do." A few mentioned mandatory reporting as a barrier. As this one girl says, "I think no student at this age would talk to their teachers only because we've got such strict protocol of reporting back to staff and parents. No one says anything to their parents either. Everyone is really good at hiding it." And actually, almost all the youth mentioned that they were afraid if they told about online activity that was negative, that they would lose online privileges, such as being taken away their iPhone or internet access. And for them, they describe this as actually being put in prison. So this is nothing they want us adults to do. Okay, so children and adolescents are very often protective of their parents, and they don't want to cause them unnecessary pain and worry. As one boy said, "There's been so much hassle with me growing up, so I didn't want to add one more thing to the list." Or this girl who says, "Well, my mom, because she's so busy and there's 8 of us, so I never wanted to worry my mom. And because she works long hours, she's a nurse. And my stepdad, well, he's got his own business. They're always busy, and I never really wanted to mention anything." So lastly, we have to recognize that talking about painful experiences is painful. Like this one boy explains, "I chose not to tell anyone, not my parents, not the police. It was so bad. It's so hard to talk about." And also feeling that you've done something really stupid causes shame and guilt. Many youth talked about shame, like this girl. We had about it at school, so we wouldn't get into these types of situations. I thought, how could I be so stupid? I was so embarrassed and shameful, so I didn't tell anyone for a long time before I told my friend. So quickly summing up, we see that the disclosure barriers they talk about are mostly the same as we see in the literature for child abuse and trauma, actually. Not understanding, being afraid of not being understood, not trusting adults, fearing that telling will have negative consequences, not wanting to be a burden to others, and not having the skills to handle the emotions that talking about negative experiences entails are common disclosure barriers we see also in the trauma field and in the child and neglect field. However, there was one barrier that we did not see in this data set that's most commonly referred to in the offline abuse and trauma literature, and that is the fear of not being believed in, that no one would believe their story. This is probably because these online stories often are documented online and there are witnesses to them. The youth in our study were very skilled internet users. So we see here that protecting our youth is not a matter of improving digital skills in itself. The youth need to feel supported, and they have to have emotional and cognitive insight to be able to protect themselves from harmful internet use. And for adults, one pathway into helping youth in trouble is to understand their world and their fears. And the next presenter, Line Steneke, will tell us a little bit more about this, how we can help them.
Thank you, Tina. Very interesting. And I think a lot of us now have food for thought. Even if I've been part of this project, I still get sort of amazed by some of these findings. One of the strengths of our project, I think, is that we have been able to merge and working interdisciplinary. And merging the media and communications field with the psychology field, and not only psychologists, but people in clinics and therapy. And I think that for our last presentation, we're going to move on to that section and looking at how our findings also can support therapists and what this means. So I would invite our last speaker before we open the floor to all questions, and please, again, if you have questions, just write them in the chat. So our final speaker is Line Steneke. She is an associate professor and a clinical psychologist at the University of Oslo, Department of Psychology, and also a senior researcher at Lovisenberg Hospital in Oslo, Norway. And her research interests include developmental psychology, adolescents' risk behavior, such as self-harm and digital risk engagement, and digital processes in psychotherapy. So, Lina, the floor is yours. Or rather the screen, I guess.
Thank you. Well, as you said, my name is Line Steneke. Can you hear me all? Is it okay, Elizabeth? So I will present some of the qualitative findings from the ySKILLS project, and especially attending to the question of how therapists can help young people with mental health problems who experience digital risks. So as we have heard, digital engagement not only bring a possibility for social acceptance, contact with friends and information. Digital engagement brings a possibility for involvement in digital risks like cyberbullying, excessive gaming, sexual abuse online, or self-harm content. The participants in our project, who all were involved in different types of digital risks, did not share their experiences with others. They did not tell their parents, teachers, or therapists. Often, they did not even tell their friends. After talking to them, we got the impression that they tried to help themselves as best as they could. One girl described how she tried to manage her online addiction. You must delete apps, fight against algorithms, clean up your feed, and log off. However, it is not surprising that young people want to find their own ways to solve problems. Still, they did not want help because they thought adults couldn't be of help. So consequently, they felt left alone. One girl said, everything is open and available all the time. My feed is filled with posts like that. It is like letting an alcoholic into the liquor store. Even those young people who had contact with a therapist were skeptical to the possibility to get help for online difficulties. In their perspective, how can a therapist understand when they don't have the same online experiences? One girl said, I feel like some mental health people, they probably do understand, but not from a young person's perspective. So they could understand from like a mental health diagnosis, the facts, the figures, and the issues. And they could probably help you, in fact, with the actual mental health part. But I don't think they could actually relate. Still, several of the participants underlined a need and wish to share online difficulties. They recommended mental health professionals to build trust and safety to gain insight into both the opportunities and the challenges in the young people's online world. A therapist needs to express curiosity and stimulate reflection. For example, by asking what is good, what is fun, interesting, or difficult online. So therapists should try to explore digital risks as part of young people's everyday life. Try to be open, to listen and take the position of the youth. One participant said, "It is more helpful to be supportive and just listen instead of explaining again and again. How did you get involved in this situation? Because I know I was stupid." Therapists should accept that mistakes are made and show eagerness to assist young people to handle difficult situations online. So maybe most importantly, young people underline how difficult it is for them to begin talking about digital risks. They recommend therapists to be concrete and ask questions. One girl said, "Don't beat the bush, ask directly. That is what I wished an adult had done." And another girl said, "I don't talk to my therapist. It just isn't relevant because they don't understand anyway." Adults understand the basic things like how it feels to be excluded, but they don't understand the rest. There is a whole different world out there, but she could have asked. It would have been okay if she asked me what I do online. And further, the young people emphasize that by exemplifying types of digital risks, the therapist normalizes these experiences. One participant said it in this way: "When a therapist asks about online activity and risks online, it feels okay and normal to have those experiences, and it makes it easier to share. Otherwise, it is easy to blame themselves." One said, "If you have to tell it yourself, you may think, oh, I'm overreacting, maybe it's my own fault. But if someone asks you, it becomes more normal." One girl described how her therapist introduced the topic. "It was easier when my therapist asked about it. I would not have brought it up myself. She just said, 'We have not talked so much about social media.' And I agreed. So I think it's just to ask an open question." This made it easier for her to describe how digital risk engagement made her feel like not being the only one with problems, but also how it triggered self-harm. If a patient describes engagement in digital risks, the therapist must remember that young people probably realize that they should not have done it. Therapists should not react with disgust, but stay calm and reduce shame. One said, "Don't victim blame. And I think first and foremost, believe. Don't read between the lines, just listen to them. And if you know someone is vulnerable, definitely try your best to keep them safe. And if they do make mistakes, be sympathetic rather than blame them because they're already blaming themselves." Last but not least, therapists should give better advice. One participant said, "Don't tell me to put away my phone. It's not an option." Therapists must remember the importance of online activity in their social life. They said, "Turn your phone off. It shouldn't affect you if you don't look at it." But they didn't understand at the time the extent that young people like to use the internet and why that was good for them. However, they appreciated to get some advice, such as how to keep an account private or that the police have an online advice center. But it seems like they need to test the water before they can evaluate the advice. One participant said, "I don't think I would have listened because it's a learning experience. How can I develop without making mistakes? I must learn it by myself because there's not always going to be that person to tell me not to do this and not to do that. And in this way, the therapist must be patient and offer scaffolding. They should offer support and guidance when the young person is available. During adolescence, contact with peers is of great importance for exploring social roles and self-identity. Digital activity may represent an extended peer arena, a place to fit in, and can enable a potential space for testing boundaries between self and others and for sharing difficult self-experiences. Young people with mental health problems related to offline or online problems bring different vulnerabilities or resources into their digital world. So many of the participants showed high digital skills, and still they may have needed that adults show interest in their digital life, ask about risk experiences, and give psychosocial support and guidance. In this way, they can find their own ways of handling digital risks. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you so much, Lina. I think, again, food for thought. I think we now turn to the discussion and the Q&A. And I think I'm also going to invite both those who have presented and also Richard Graham and Reidar Skjævessen and Sonia Livingstone, who has co-authored this report, to jump in and answer if they feel the need for it. And I think I'm just going to go to the chat and see, and I think we all want to comment on each other, but let's turn to the chat first. So Jasmine Park has asked the first question, and some questions I can see has been resolved interactively in the chat while we're going along, which I think is just an excellent collaboration effort, and I just want to say thank you for that. So, but the question is, how can platforms avoid exposing young people to their unique triggers without collecting more information about their vulnerable behaviors, etc.? And of course, here is a group of media scholars and psychologists, so and also policymakers. But it's an interesting question because, of course, no matter what you do on the individual level, you know, you still have the platforms. I don't know if anyone feels a call to answer this question. Because, I can also mention, and as was said, that many of the youth in this study described how they would even try to curate their own feeds and have multiple accounts for different types of mood or different types of setting, knowing that some of them might just keep getting these trigger contents or this particular, you know, if it was eating disorder or if it was something else. So, Maria, you want to take on this challenge?
Yes, well, I can start off and then maybe my colleagues will answer. First of all, I think young people are very aware of the limitations or the regulations around the platform. So they were really good at, when they wanted to hide messages, to be able to bypass these regulations. So sometimes the platforms will put in a very difficult situation of being very difficult to acknowledge, find this kind of content. For example, sharing an image which has nothing to do with the topic, and then in the comments there are suggestions for harmful content and things like this. So they were very crafty when they wanted to bypass this. But Elizabeth, as you were suggesting, they were really taking on any opportunity that they were given to clean their feeds and stay away from harmful content. It was very difficult for them to predict when this will happen. So I do think that platforms need to up their game and to be able to produce more functionalities that allow children to do this work for themselves and to be able to granularly either add hashtags they don't want to engage with or just be able to have a more positive feed as well. And I'm sure that the other colleagues will probably have something to add to this as well.
Yes, they might. Yes, Richard, do you want to also say something about this question?
Yeah, just following on from what Maria said, I think it references in the report that technology in terms of online has shifted from a pull technology where you are actively searching for content to this somehow acceptance that we have now that algorithms will keep sending us content. And I think when we are thinking of the impact of that, whatever the extreme nature of that content that is pushed to us, there is a helplessness that I think Maria is indicating, where we feel we can't get out of it, we can't break away. And I think the push nature of the technology may itself be a significant factor, that it isn't just the nature of the content, it's the fact that you can't stop it. And that helplessness is very poor for your mental health.
Thank you. And I think, and I can see now in the chat that there's a lot of questions about advice. And I want to just highlight that in the report, the youth is giving a lot of advices, not just for therapists, but also for parents and for policymakers. So, and we will also elaborate this further and from the ySKILLS project and come with policy advice reports on different aspects later in the project. So next year in the spring, we will do this, but from the youth side, they have already offered a lot of advice. So I encourage anyone who's interested to look at that section of the report, and you will find your group. So I think I'll just move to the next question and saying that, so Isabella has asked the question about individuals able to recognize their own triggers online as challenging. Did the research show that adolescents who are more educated have less or more negative experiences on the presence of a mental illness and impact their ability to identify the triggers? So is there inequalities here? And this goes back, I guess, also to Len's presentation and some of June's concerns about especially vulnerable youth also. I don't know if anyone feels like taking up this challenge. I mean, this is qualitative research. We did not, of course, note education levels, I think. So I think, but maybe Len, do we know anything of this from other parts of the ySKILLS project about the differences in education levels? And
yes, we do. Education may be a predictor, but it's not so clear. I mean, digital skills, we need to have a really, that's clear from the research, a granular approach to digital skills. Digital skills, certain digital skills work for certain groups and don't work for other groups. And in that way, I think the quantitative is really helped by the qualitative in-depth research, because we see, for instance, when children engage in negative content, we see the motivation behind it, or we can at least ask how come, what was the context, how did they get into this negative content, and were there ways, did they see ways to remedy that, which is not possible in quantitative research, but for sure we know that in the curricula in for instance, the grammar schools, there is more education on, for instance, digital literacy and media literacy overall than in the more technical school curricula. We also know, for instance, that in OECD research, recent research that came out, that overall only 1 in 2 children in Europe have heard about digital literacy, 1 in 2. So there is a lot across the board and across the different education levels to remedy. And what became clear here in this research was that we don't need to look at the child, him or herself, only at the individual, but at the support systems. And who are the support systems? In what way are they lacking? For instance, in the research on refugee children, we saw pretty much the same problem there, that in the 3 sites that we had looked at, some kids, some refugee kids get education, or enrolled in education, for instance, in the Belgian site, and partly also in the UK Leuven site, but not at all when you look at the Greek camps. So the support systems are very important, and this is what is research, qualitative research, and in a way also what we will come up with in the 4th year, looking at the child and then look at the peers in the class. The classroom peer support seems to be very important and an important factor for well-being and also for digital skills.
Yes, thank you. And I think that one of the frustrating things, of course, is that we at one point now know that many children don't get enough digital skills. But then we also know from this research that digital skills will not be enough. So you know, Tina, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to add a couple of things, because I think what we found in our group and our interviews was so interesting was these very different pathways into these difficult sites. And to me, it seemed like for some youth, they just really stumble over it. You know, they're at home, they're bored, they're, you know, looking for things, and all of a sudden they're seeing something really, really horrible that affects their concentration and their sleep, and it haunts them. And then you have the other group that's more that they perhaps have some difficulties, you know, eating or feeling comfortable about their body or something. And then they use the internet to seek information about how to handle these things. And that brings them into these negative sites. So I think, you know, when we think about how to help them, we have to recognize that there's so many individual stories here, and that we really, as helpers, even adults or parents or teachers or whatever, have to really be very open-minded, like Lena said, and be very, just ask them, you know, and not assume that there's one way in and it's one way of making meaning out of that. So I think that's what I just wanted to add.
Yes, thank you. And I see there's a lot of questions coming in now, and unfortunately we only have 2 minutes left of this webinar, but we would of course be open to have another one and discuss this further. I know that many people have asked questions, and I don't know if anyone very shortly would like to comment on Felix's question of, should platforms moderate the audiovisual contents available like teachers and parents do in Patio to risk and mix and maximize opportunities? Anyone want to do a quick yes or no? Or yes, June. And I was going to actually that's well, because I see, June, you've also posted a question to everyone, and do academics think that DSA will bring more transparency and control over the algorithms? So I don't know if we can answer that, but I wanted to give actually the final word to you and say, also ask you if you have any takeaways now for policy, and if this, you know, how does it look from your side of the table?
Thank you. Well, it's been really fascinating, and I feel I've learned a lot and had a lot also reinforced. So that's been really, really interesting. This conference is fantastic. Quick word on the audiovisual, the video sharing thing. I think under the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, so from the EU's legislative point of view, we're all in favor of freedom of speech, you know, all that sort of stuff. But there is a clause in there that says that, you know, these platforms should you know, protect children from anything that can impair their, I think it's mental, physical and moral development, you know, so quite interesting old-fashioned wording in some ways, but the burden is there on industry not to police what's on their platforms, but to protect children from seeing content that is not age appropriate for them. So, you know, again, it comes down to effective implementation of legislation rather than actually changing what's available. But we have children, you know, afloat in a digital sea, a digital pool that's really constructed for adults, as I think we all know. I've taken lots of points down. I think what really interested me, and I think also from a question from Laura, any advice for parents, I think that there was great overlap between really the advice for therapists and the advice for all of us as adults, which is really be open with the young people that we know, you know, talk about what we do and talk about what they do, be interested, be curious, and don't be judgmental. And I think that's the best way to really get children then being willing to share, and also that we can learn from their experiences and, you know, talk to each other as equals, because in lots of ways they're the experts on, you know, their digital childhood. They're the only ones who are living through it. I can only say it's helped me with my children to take that approach. So I've learned from the experts, and I'm trying just passing that on as another mother.
Thank you. So, and I'd like to thank you all for participating. Of course, I would like to thank the co-authors and the speakers and the presenters today, and a special thanks both to June and to Leanne, who has participated. The biggest thanks goes to the audience. Thank you for all these interesting interactions. Please read the report. If you have comments and questions and ideas for new research, we would be happy to hear from you. Follow ySKILLS. There's more coming out of this project. And I think I'll just going to say thank you and conclude that obviously more research is needed.